some guys out there are just getting carried.
Dilfer's 2000 odyssey ended where it began. He was looking for a job.
As a quarterback in the NFL, winning the Super Bowl is treated as the pinnacle. So let's take a look back at the 5 greatest quarterbacks of all time to never win a championship, and the 5 who did that and definitely don't deserve it. Worst, Jim McMahon. Jim McMahon was an integral part of the identity of the legendary 1985 Chicago Bears, who dominated all year long, including the Super Bowl, which they want the New England Patriots in. In fact, they were one of the most dominant teams that we've ever seen. I mean, just look at the warpath that they tore on the way to that win over New England. In the first 2 rounds of the playoffs, they shut out the Giants and Rams by a combined score of 45-0, then proceeded to light up New England 46-10. McMahon played pretty well during that stretch, but most of what he had to do was complementary to that ridiculously good defense. And when you look at the broader view of his career, honestly, he's one of the worst quarterbacks that we've ever seen win a Super Bowl. Granted, injuries played a big role in limiting his counting numbers, but the reality is that McMahon was a glorified game manager. Just one with a whole lot of spunk. Greatest to never win, Philip Rivers. In many ways, Philip Rivers was like this recent generation's Dan Marino. He was extremely talented and had success very early on in his career with those high-flying Chargers offenses. The issue with Rivers, like Marino, was that once the postseason rolled around, it always seemed like something would go awry and he and his squad would just come up short. It was particularly shocking to watch this play out with Rivers because there is just so much talent on those Chargers teams, on the offensive side of the ball in particular. Throughout his career, he had guys like Damian Tomlinson, Antonio Gates, Keenan Allen, and others at his disposal. It always seemed like a far-gone conclusion that eventually the Chargers would find a way to hoist the Lombardi Trophy. But alas, Rivers also happened to be one of the most likable players in the league, which made his consistent shortcomings all the more painful to watch. He was so competitive and fiery on the field and known as one of the best leaders in the game. But unfortunately, all of his skills, both the impressive physical traits and the intangibles, just weren't enough to elevate his team during crunch time when it needed him to. Worst, Nick Foles. All things considered, Nick Foles has had one of the most puzzling NFL careers that we have seen in recent history. First, he had that one ridiculous season in Philadelphia where he got slotted in as the starter due to injury and played the position near flawlessly. Then, after a couple of failed attempts as a starter, Foles ended up back in Philly where another injury, this time to Carson Wentz, opened up an opportunity for him to step in as the starter and, well, to say that he took advantage of it would be an understatement of epic proportions. Behind Nick Foles, the Eagles marched all the way to the Super Bowl, where Foles shocked the world and outdueled Tom Brady, securing the win and MVP honors in the process. And then, just like that, Foles seemed to turn back into a pumpkin. So while he certainly deserves all the credit in the world for the way that he performed during that run, there is no confusing Nick Foles with a true star quarterback, like most of the guys that are able to lead their team to wins in the Super Bowl. Sad to say because the story is freaking awesome and he seems like a great guy, but well, based on the totality of his career, Foles is definitely one of the worst starting quarterbacks that we've ever seen win the big game. Greatest to never win, Warren Moon. The story of Warren Moon's professional football odyssey is one to behold. He started his professional career not in the NFL at all, but in Edmonton as a member of the Eskimos of the Canadian Football League. During his time with Edmonton, he led the team to 5 consecutive Grey Cup victories, which was basically their equivalent of the Super Bowl. Now, despite the astronomical success that he had up north, it took some time for NFL scouts to wise up and accept that Moon was cut out for the NFL play style. Once he finally got to the NFL, well, he never looked back. Over his 17-year NFL career, he threw for a ridiculous 49,325 passing yards, placing him among the top passers in NFL history, despite missing a good chunk of his prime while he was up in Canada. Moon was also named a Pro Bowler in 9, which is over half of his NFL seasons. Unfortunately, despite the elite level of success that he achieved as an individual, Moon's teams continuously fell short of Super Bowl glory. His career was still good enough to land Moon in Canton, where he was inducted in 2006, but there is no doubt that it feels slightly incomplete without that championship. Worst, Brad Johnson. Brad Johnson is another example of a very middle-of-the-road, to put it nicely, quarterback who was able to win a Super Bowl on the strength of an all-time great defense. There's a reason that when people look back on those Tampa Bay Buccaneers team that won Super Bowl 37, they talk about Warren Sapp and Derek Brooks, guys like that, and not the signal caller that you would tend to expect. Those Bucs teams were built around that defense, and they built it well, as evidenced by the roughshod that they ran on the Raiders during the big game that year. And when people look back on that offense, well, it wasn't even like Johnson even played a complimentary role. The offense ran through the running game, and everyone just crossed their fingers that Johnson wouldn't mess anything up. Yeah, kinda hard to say that with that description, that Johnson overly deserved a ring that he got on the strength of that Bucs defense. Greatest to never win, Fran Tarkington. Fran Tarkington was not only one of the best quarterbacks of his generation, but he was also a fundamental game changer for the position and subsequently the game of football. Tarkington possessed a mobility that was rare at the time and was able to extend plays in the way that we see many modern quarterbacks do nowadays. While he was with the Vikings, he put up gaudy numbers on a semi-regular basis. I mean, so much so that when he retired, he was the NFL's all-time leader in passing yards and touchdowns, which obviously is no small feat. He just couldn't quite manage to get the job done in the biggest moments. In fact, he was kind of a precursor to Jim Kelly in many ways, as Tarkington led the Vikings to 3 Super Bowl appearances, but they just couldn't walk away with a single win, making the experience all the more painful for Fran. Not to mention the Vikings' dedicated fan base. Worst, Jeff Hostetler. While Jeff Hostetler deserves a lot of credit for the role that he played in helping the New York Giants win Super Bowl 15 as he was forced to step in mid-season for an injured Phil Simms, make no mistake about it, Hostetler was not exactly a Super Bowl caliber quarterback. Heck, the rest of his career kind of tells the story of this man, who honestly was hardly an NFL starting caliber quarterback. Like we said, it's impressive that he was able to get slotted in when the team needed him and actually deliver, but all things considered, he simply wasn't a very good NFL quarterback, particularly in the context of the QBs that were able to lead their team to Super Bowl wins. Greatest to never win, Dan Marino. Whenever the topic of best quarterback never to win a Super Bowl comes up, Dan Marino always seems to be one of the first names that gets brought up. Not only was he one of the greatest quarterbacks of his time, but even compared to today's ballooned passing metrics, his career numbers were able to stand the test of time. Of course, some of the numerous records that he set during his Hall of Fame career were and will continue to be broken, but that's just an unavoidable fact of reality with the way that the game is trending. But still, when you look back at what he was able to accomplish during his playing days, it really is ridiculous. He held some of the most important passing records in the game at the time of his retirement, including touchdown passes and yards, and honestly, he changed the way that the position was played. Oh boy, and he did it fast, as he had immediate success as soon as he stepped onto the NFL gridiron. Marino was a transcendent talent, plain and simple. The only problem? Well, he was never able to get over the hump and secure a Lombardi trophy for the Dolphins. It was one of the more puzzling ones to fans too, because he made it so early in his career that there was always this sort of assumption that it was only a matter of time and he was going to win one. An assumption that ultimately ended up being proven dead wrong. What made this entire experience all the more painful and, well, humiliating for Marino is that his final season and last attempt at winning a ring ended in a massive embarrassment. His Dolphins were absolutely decimated by the upstart Jaguars, and thus Marino limped off into retirement without ever accomplishing his goal of winning a Super Bowl. Worst, Trent Dilfer. The same way that Dan Marino is regularly referenced as a top quarterback to never win a Super Bowl, Trent Dilfer gets his name thrown around with an almost as dubious bunch. You know, the group of worst quarterbacks to back their way into a title. Dilfer was the starting quarterback for the Baltimore Ravens in Super Bowl 35, and while his name will obviously forever be cemented in history as a Super Bowl winning quarterback, so too will the debate of how much he really contributed to it. Which, spoiler alert, the general consensus seems to be not so much. It's actually an interesting thought experiment to look back at the NFL landscape at the time and just how dominant that Ravens defense was and wonder just how bad of a quarterback could they have had and still manage to get the job done with. Dilfer was mediocre at best, but with the way that defense lit up the Giants, it felt like they could have grabbed a staffer from the equipment room, put him at quarterback, and still had a chance to win. I'm sorry, Trent, no hard feelings, but we know we aren't telling you something you haven't heard already. Greatest to never win, Cam Newton. While Cam Newton's NFL career is not technically over at this point, I mean, at a minimum, it's on life support. But man, when things were good for Cam, he was darn fun to watch. Newton hit the ground running after entering the NFL as the first overall pick in the 2011 NFL Draft, almost immediately establishing himself as one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Though he did struggle with precision passing at times, his arm was among the strongest in the league when he was at his best. He could make throws that no one else could. And of course, the secret ingredient is what really made him Superman. And that was his blistering speed and impressive physicality that he could run the football with. Honestly, when he was healthy, Cam Newton was truly unstoppable. Across his career, he totaled over 31,000 passing yards, more than 5,000 rushing yards, and over 240 combined passing and rushing touchdowns. The one thing that was missing was the Super Bowl win. His best chance came in 2015 when he won NFL MVP honors and marched the Panthers to a 15-1 record and a Super Bowl appearance, which, well, we all know how that one ended, with a business decision and a very painful loss. But hey, which ringless NFL quarterback do you think was the greatest to ever do it? And which Super Bowl winner deserved the title the least? Was there anyone that we may have missed? Let us know in the comment section below. If you liked this video and learned a thing or two, clicking the like button helps out a ton, but hey, we appreciate it. If this is your first time coming around to TPS though, subscribing is a great idea, because we put out videos like this every single day. But as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.